So we're going to dispense with the introductory reading or music because of the technical difficulties. But I want to welcome you all to the Sunday morning meeting of the Humanists of Greater Portland. My name is Jeff Strang, and I'll be the MC today. We're back to a hybrid meeting format, and we have about 10 or 12 people here at Friendly House, so it's great to see everybody in person. And our meeting today will be recorded. Our presenter has agreed to allow her presentation to be available to the general public through the HGP website. The Humanists of Greater Portland is a chapter of the American Humanists Association. Humanism is a non-theistic worldview with ethical values informed by scientific knowledge and driven by a desire to meet the needs of people in the here and now. At the foundation of those values is an affirmation of the dignity of every human being. HGP is an all-volunteer group that believes strongly in freedom of speech. Our topic today is college faculty fighting back against educational gag orders, presented by Jennifer Ruth. Dr. Ruth is a professor of film studies at Portland State University. She is the author of 3 books, the most recent being It's Not Free Speech, Race, Democracy, and the Future of Academic Freedom, co-authored with Michael Berube. She also served as the editor of the Journal of Academic Freedom from 2016 to 2017. Dr. Ruth, you're welcome to HGP, and we thank you for presenting to us today.
Thank you, Jeff, for introducing me, and thank you for having me. And I hope I didn't cause some of this problem by kind of pushing myself to come in person. But I was telling people here that COVID's been long, and then I've been on sabbatical, so I haven't been teaching. So just the idea of being in person was just such a great, and and with everything going on in the world right now, it's just nice to feel some humanity. So thank you. I hope I didn't make it more complicated technologically. The other thing I want to say about myself and coming here is just that I think Joyce Lackey is the one who found me and asked me, and I don't know how much the rest of you know about what I do or what I'm going to talk about. So and I really do want there to be a lot of discussion. So I may end up, I'm not sure how much familiarity everyone will have with the kinds of things that I'm talking about. But I'm a professor, like Jeff said, and I work on academic freedom issues. And I think it's really important in this moment in which free speech, I feel like we're in a new era in terms of the rise of social media, the rise of a sort of what some people are calling a post-truth or post-fact world, where free speech is guaranteed by the First Amendment. But free speech says you can say what you want and nobody can stop you unless you're screaming fire in a crowded theater. But free speech doesn't discriminate, and it shouldn't, between what we might call high value speech and just a uninformed, ignorant opinion. But academic freedom should. So to a certain extent, the work that I've been doing in the last few years has a lot to do with the fact that academic freedom, or we could even call it professional responsibility. It doesn't just have to be academics. Think about the John Eastman as a lawyer who twisted the Constitution such that he argued that Mike Pence should be able to, discredit the election and call Trump the winner. He did that on the basis of his judicial expertise, his lawyer expertise, but it was wrong. And 99.9% of lawyers said, no, that's just not true. That's just not right. And 99% of his peers. So it doesn't just have to be academics, but academics have been part of this new world that we're in, that use social media in political partisan ways that makes it really hard to distinguish truth from lying. And Hannah Arendt is a big icon for me. And, she's been quoted a lot in the last few years because she said in a couple of different places, Origins of Totalitarianism in particular, she said the problem, the bigger the lie, the more likely it is to be believed, because people think you can't possibly, make that up because it's too easy to verify. So you kind of believe it. And she said the other thing that I think is useful that she said is that it's not so much necessarily that everyone gullibly quickly believes the lie as it is that they decide they don't know what to believe or who to believe, and the rise of apathy. So for example, in the last election, Clinton versus Trump, a lot of people stayed home because they just felt confused. So that sense of not knowing what to believe and who's telling the truth has really deleterious effects on democracy, hugely deleterious effects on democracy. So the thing that Joyce asked me to talk about is this work that I've been doing with the African American Policy Forum around getting faculty senate. So it's very academic. So I don't know how many, Joyce might be a retired professor. I don't know how many retired academics I have here. So I don't know how much I should explain about how faculty senates work or shared governance. But let me just actually start my slideshow. So maybe I think I need to share, and I'll just go through my slides, and then hopefully if I've said anything that needs more explanation, we can talk about it in the Q&A, and we can just talk about this moment that we find ourselves in that's so incredibly polarized, but in which, from my vantage point, having read, so one of the ways in which, one of the lies that are circulating, Trump, the election was stolen. So also, I don't know, it's kind of a little bit awkward just because while I was excited to be invited by the Greater Humanists because I'm an atheist and also feel, but I have strong sense that ethics doesn't come from a supernatural being. It comes from our ability to have compassion and empathy and being able to treat the sort of the Kantian idea of, you treat people like you want to be treated, and the fundamental dignity of every human being. So I was delighted to be invited, but I'm a very political person, and I don't know who you guys all are necessarily. So just, that's, I guess, a trigger warning of sorts. Okay, so one of the lies that I've been thinking a lot about is the lie that critical race theory says that white people are inherently racist, that just the way in which that school of thought, which emerged in the 80s, which among legal scholars, looking at the ways, the question that was posed, that started Derek Bell, Richard Delgado, Kimberly Crenshaw, all the original critical race theories. The question that they posed is, hey, we did get some really important legislation through with the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. We did make sure, eliminating Jim Crow, right? That's Brown v. Board, like things are much better than they were 5 years ago. And then after 20 years, you're in the early 80s, 20 years, you're saying, but then why haven't things changed more, right? Like, why do we still have such segregated worlds? And very quickly, and so starting to look at the ways in which, for example, one of the kinds of work that came out of critical race theory were people looking at redlining and the ways in which the covenants and real estate laws that said you can't, those continued to exist, and also looking at the compounded inequalities over time. So looking at the intersection of economics and race so that you can get rid of some of the like very overt prejudice, but the compounded historical effects continue to accumulate. And because of the way the stock market, blah, 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 some people are now in a position to send their children to college and other people aren't. So that's the kind of thing critical race theory did. It didn't say white people are oppressors and Black people are victims. So that's one of the lies that I've been looking at. And when the Republicans started to use it, some of whom I think, and we were talking earlier about the Republicans who still have a foot in sanity. And I'm not talking about them. I'm not talking about Liz Cheney. I'm pretty far left. So I'm not a fan of Liz Cheney, but I admire the fact that she's telling the truth. I admire Kissinger. So I'm not anti-Republican, I'm anti the Republicans who seem to either cynically or gullibly or ignorantly be using these lies for political advantage, and who see the fact that we are becoming increasingly a multiracial democracy, and see that race is something that can be used to hold on to political power, even as a white minority. That those are the Republicans that are they're terrifying, right? Because they're the ones who are going to back Trump, even when they know that Trump is ignorant and lying, et cetera. So I've been looking at the way that critical race theory has been used, and the fact that the people, and it's very political, right? So the politicians that are going up for election, they use the culture wars, and the culture wars is, in critical race theory, is the centerpiece of the culture wars right now. And I can tell you, as a Portland State, Portland, Oregon, we're laughed about as being so far left, and our students are fascistly left, and yeah, I have had to learn to be cognizant of pronouns. So what? That's the extent of the degree to which I've had to sort of accommodate a kind of hardcore left, right? It's just not happening, at least among all of my friends across the country and within Portland State. Students are not, I have made mistakes in the classroom with pronouns, with calling one African-American student by another African-American student's name. And I apologize, and they say, it's fine. They don't suddenly try to get me fired. Like the culture wars, it's from my vantage point, I'm not in every university, right? But it's largely manufactured. And actually that's something that I have some evidence for, actually. So let me share. And also, this was more of a I haven't even gotten to my slides. So if maybe I should be cut off at some point to make sure that we have discussion. Okay, so this is just a collage of stuff that speaks to our moment, and also speaks to the McCarthy moment and the ways in which this isn't entirely new. And race, it's interesting to me the way in which the McCarthy period too really centered race in these issues, communism. So for example, that you can't see it. Did I do that? No. Okay. You can't, though. You guys in Zoom land can see this. You guys cannot see this, but the "we want a white school" picture from after Brown v. Board, when during integration, there were tons of signs that said communism and integration are one and the same, right? They tried to conflate equality with equality in terms of race with communism. That kind of conflation has been going on forever. The degree, and in fact, I wonder if there's a degree in which communism becomes a stand-in for racists. You're going to say, oh, these horrible red commies, and you're really more talking about race or wanting to talk about race, but you feel more of a sense of inhibition or self-censoring around race that we're not seeing anymore after Trump, after the dog whistling, after the overt racism that's coming out in the discourse, and the relative. So whereas before, during the the integration period, you would talk about communism, but you were really kind of implicitly also talking about integration and equality, racial equality, not economic equality. Now we seem to be willing, a certain far right Republicans seem to be willing to put race right there and use it for fear mongering. So there is an echo with the McCarthy era for sure, and so what we see in school boards. So let me keep moving. Yes, okay. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ellen Schrecker. She's a historian. She's written a couple of books. She's pretty much the leading expert in the United States on the McCarthy period and the degree to which individuals were persecuted if they wouldn't sign a loyalty oath. And as I was watching all this happen in terms of critical race theory, I emailed her, and I had some interactions with her because I'm on the American Association of University Professors. We're an organization that has a lot of chapters across universities, and we're sort of a weird combination of professional and labor. Originally, because you have the professional associations that are the labor boards and the medical. We're like that for the academics, for professors, But we also more over time, because of the rise of what we call contingent faculty who are just paid by the course and not given health insurance, and they're just paid pennies, really, pennies. We are becoming a little bit more proactive around being a labor union rather than just a professional association, right? But so I'm very active in this group, American Association of University Professors. I'm on their Committee A, which is their Committee for Academic Freedom. And we're the group that actually, we're the group, Committee A, where, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but sometimes if a university does something really egregious, like fires a professor because the professor's pissed off the president's spouse or a donor or something, we're the group to censor, CENSURE, right? Condemn, not censor, but censure that institution and put it on the shit list. And that's historically, it actually has never had a ton of teeth, but it has had a lot of prestige or status or sort of cultural capital kind of weight. And universities don't want to be on that list. So we have been able to have a pretty good impact. So Ellen Schrecker, I knew her from AAUP kind of stuff. And I emailed her, this is 2.5 years ago. And I said, what do you think in terms of, you're the expert on the McCarthy era and the way in which everybody caved, essentially. I mean, she wrote this book, I'm spacing on the title, but it's no ivory tower. That's what it's called. No ivory tower, meaning that the university has just kind of caved and said, yeah, if you don't do a loyalty oath, we're going to fire you, kind of thing. So she's the expert on this sort of shameful moment around free speech or academic freedom. And I said, what do you think about this anti-critical race theory and these bills that people are putting forward about you're not allowed to talk about divisive concepts, which, we can talk about later what is meant by that, and whether, I guess, there's a way in which talking about slavery at all is uncomfortable. When you learn, I remember as a kid, and ironically, and I think this is actually very telling in terms of being in the United States, I remember feeling profoundly unsettled and disoriented learning about Anne Frank. There's a way in which we were more comfortable. And I don't mean to say this as like we shouldn't be, I'm not one of those people who's going to be talking about the Holocaust industry, right? I think we should be talking about the Holocaust. But there's a way in which it's easier for Americans to talk about the Holocaust than it is to talk about our history of terrorism, racial terrorism, and lynching, et cetera. But those things, when you learn about what people have done to people, it is profoundly uncomfortable. So there's a way in which it's been uncomfortable for Black students to learn what happened to their great-grandparents, right? And now all of a sudden it's divisive concepts because some people are saying that some educators are making white students feel uncomfortable. So the idea that the state, most importantly, we can get into the nuance of how they're using these concepts, how they're sort of redefining racism to be racism against white people now, all of that kind of stuff. But the bigger issue is simply that you're using the state. This is not students shouting down me because I said something that they think is too conservative or whatever. This is using the state to censor faculty and students from talking about whole subjects and creating a huge amount of fear among educators getting even close to certain areas, right? I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen, there's articles everywhere that say teachers are just saying, I just don't want to touch stuff that I talked about in the past without controversy. Not only will I not push it a little further after George Floyd's murder, or not only will I not, introduce a new James Baldwin text, not only will I not do that, I don't even want to talk about it at all because I'm afraid that I could get fired and that a parent could get me fired. So I emailed Ellen and I said, what do you think about this? Is the second McCarthyism 2.0. And she was like, let me do a little research, because this was in the early stages. And then about 2 days later, she emailed me, she goes, oh, this is worse than McCarthyism. And so I have this I don't have it, but there's this blog. It doesn't get very much readership, unfortunately, but it's called the Academe blog, and it's through the AAUP. But so she wrote this piece at the top, yes, these bills are the new McCarthyism. The second piece is by a Rollins College professor who wrote about the the legislature, House bills around viewpoint diversity is another kind of euphemism, divisive concepts, viewpoint diversity. And he wrote that this is, if that was the red scare, this is the black scare. Slides, but this slide is simply about the manufacturing of this so-called crisis and the kind of hysteria. So you see on the far left, the "Is this tomorrow America under communism?" This is from the McCarthy period, that cover, that image. And then, but in our modern moment, we have these conservative think tanks, Heritage Foundation think tanks funded by the Koch brothers, that are creating the sense that critical race theory is tearing us apart. And it's making it to the point where you've got a David Brooks, right? A mainstream figure who is writing editorials. So this is from 2021. Here's the mindset that's tearing us apart. So the idea is that this specialty critical race theory academic discipline that looked at how disparate outcomes for certain kinds of things, like certain kinds of testing, different redlining for real estate kind of stuff, looked at stuff like that, has created this tribalism between black and white that is tearing us apart. No, it didn't. It's been around for 30 years and people pretty much ignored it. Or there were a few academics in law schools or in graduate school, because it's kind of hard, you know, it's you're looking at, you're reading laws and your court cases and you're figuring out, well, is it fair that, you know, race wasn't explicitly described, but the voter registration stuff is a great case in point for critical race theory. The voter registration stuff, when you look at, if we decide that we're only going to let people vote on this time, or they can't vote through mail-in ballots or whatever, does that have a disparate impact on different populations? You know, does the working class not vote as much if we don't make voting? You know, those are the questions that critical race theory looks at. So there's a certain level of sophistication, and that's not tribalism. That's not black versus white. But that's what even a David Brooks is saying in a New York Times editorial. Here's the mindset that's tearing us apart. Identity politics, because it's getting conflated with identity politics. And it's very easy to attack identity because we're all human, and that, you know, our fundamental impulse is to want to say those things are superficial and our humanity is what's fundamental. And that's true, but that also doesn't change the fact that if you're black and you your parents have not been able to invest in a house that then allowed you to then go to college and create, those things are also still true, right? I mean, race and gender and class do have effects on how we live our lives fairly and unfairly. So yes, we have a common humanity, but these things are also true. So it's turned into this like language around tribalism that's completely unfair to critical race theory. So there's this wonderful book that I reviewed recently that I recommend. It might be a little too much about universities if you're not an academic, but it's about free speech and Koch money. And these guys, Isaac Kamola and Ralph Wilson, they really trace the degree to which Koch money has fueled a lot of really damaging things in our society, beginning with the tobacco industry. And Koch created a kind of both sidesism around smoking. So you had a period during when we remember the lawsuits, and there, you know, and the tobacco industry was fighting back hard about, we didn't know that it caused cancer, all of that kind of stuff, and the warnings on things, all of those kinds of controversies. The Koch money was helping to fuel a situation where journalists were being made to feel, and some of the blame does kind of go on journalists over these decades for being sort of vulnerable to this, but being made to feel like if you interview an expert about what smoking does to your lungs, you also need to show the other side and show the pleasure that smoking brings, right? So it's the both sidesism that you need to always show the other side. So then we have climate change. Koch money has fueled, there's a both sides. There's, you got to show the people who don't think that climate change is man-made, blah, blah, blah. And now we've got it with the universities. When Charles Murray, I don't know if you guys are familiar with who he is, he's the one who did the IQ race stuff back in the 80s. And yes, the bell curve, the bell jar. So it's simply a plaque. Yeah. So yeah, when he did that, so he was not that long ago, but this is the beginning of putting universities at the center of the manufactured culture wars. He was invited to Wesleyan, and some students protest. He was invited to speak. Charles Murray was invited to speak. This was, I don't know where it was in relationship to George Floyd's murder, but of course we've been in a period in the last few years of thinking of racial reckoning a little bit more, thinking about like when you see Derek Chauvin clearly think that he has impunity to keep his knee on this man's neck, it triggered a more multiracial protests and more people were reading books. I am guilty of this in the sense that I'm the white liberal who saw that and was shocked to the core. You know, I had Black friends who were like, we've been telling this, but shocked to the core, and began doing a lot of reading that I hadn't done before and realizing some things that I hadn't realized before. The fact that it did have this multiracial effect and it did reach so many people, Me Too, it was at the same kind of thing, has created an enormous backlash, right? The backlash against, no, we don't want a racial reckoning. No, the racial reckoning is the racist thing. That's the logic here. So the Koch money, when Charles Murray was invited to Wesleyan, and there was a big protest, and I think someone threw something and it hit one of the students acted badly, right? There's a couple of journalists who are really on this beat of these out of control students who don't respect free speech, right? That's what it doesn't turn into the fact that they're saying, why are we giving this racist who recirculates debunked racial science, why are we giving him a platform and legitimizing him? That was what they were asking. What the journalists say is they don't understand free speech. And the Koch money has funded that whole discourse, that whole converting one debate, like let's actually have racial equality, or let's actually try to not be racist, to anti-free speech. So those are actually set up. That's you just convert it into anti-free speech, and now you're on a totally different playing field, and you have much more impact. So there's a bunch of journalists who've been on that beat. They do things like, so if you guys read, if you read something in the Atlantic magazine, you want to believe what you read in the Atlantic magazine. You don't necessarily look at the reporter's name and go back and look at everything else that reporter has written and think about whether there's a bias. So Oberlin. So, you know, when you read an Atlantic magazine article, you're likely to want to believe that this is decent journalism. But if you go, so you should start looking at who's writing what, because they're doing both sidesism in all of the mainstream presses. So you have Atlantic hired, I'm going to space on his name, but he wrote a really great book about the inequality in funding around higher education in historically Black colleges and universities, and the way in which funding got diverted from them over the years to predominantly white, which is critical race theory, just actually looking at where did the money go, how the laws work, how did they get repurposed in ways that undermined the original intent, those kind of like fairly, you know, research heavy kinds of arguments. He wrote a book around looking at all of that. Atlantic hires him. Great. We have a Black journalist who's looking at these issues, but they also have a Connor Friedersdorf. I don't know if you're familiar with this guy, but he's the guy who goes around and looks for every outrage. So he wrote a story. I don't know if you guys saw this, and I would believe it if I didn't know who he is, about Oberlin and the Asian students getting really upset about the cultural appropriation of the banh mi in the cafeterias, and saying it's not true. Like he tells a story of students getting all up in arms because the cafeteria is culturally appropriating Asian food. And then when someone else has to go, another journalist who knows to be critical of Connor Friedersdorf has to go look into it and see that there's one line in a student newspaper about how the banh mi is really bad. It's not good. It's not authentic. And Friedersdorf turns that into the illiberal, crazy snowflake left that's freaking out about identity politics kind of stuff. So if you don't know you're going to believe that there is this huge culture war. There are these crazy students who are, and I'm sure, every group has its extreme end, but it's not the way the Koch money is behind this. And it's even behind, these think tanks are behind this. It's even behind the Atlantic magazine, the speech wars. So, nobody's seeing my slides now, right?
No, they're all seeing your slides except for us.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the Atlantic, I just have an image of this Atlantic magazine. They have a whole series called The Speech Wars. It's funded by Koch money. So you don't know this, right? And so now my next question is, how is this being reported on the higher ed press? And this has been something that's been really personally disappointing, is the degree to which the higher ed press, Chronicle of Higher Education, and there's not that many, but there's a Chronicle of Higher Ed that covers what happens in universities. There's Inside Higher Ed. They're very much, because it's fun to read about the latest crazy thing that happened on some campus, right? That's a lot more fun than actually reading the text of the House bills that are talking about divisive concepts and trying to weaponize race and dog whistle to win elections. The higher ed press is going very much along with this and is just sort of acting like, oh, the new generation doesn't understand free speech. And then they're also, this is where my work comes in, which might be a little technical, but so I have a new book with my colleague, Michael Berube. It's called It's Not Free Speech. And the reason why we call it that is that academic freedom and free speech are not the same thing. And actually, let me talk a little bit about that. And then maybe, I don't know how long I've talked, but maybe I'll just, well, no, I definitely have to talk about how we're fighting back, because that's why Joyce invited me to talk about what faculty senates are doing. But free speech, so free speech, this is where I actually started talking, was around the fact that free speech you don't discriminate. The First Amendment, you don't discriminate between high value speech and low value speech, uninformed versus informed. Academic freedom should, right? Because the academic freedom says, we're not going to protect your claim if you're not using any of the training that you did to get hired as a professor, to get your doctorate, to look at what other people are saying, to do the research, to go to the archives. If you're not doing any of that and you're misrepresenting things, either out of ignorance or partisan cynicism, with disinformation or misinformation, we're starting to learn these different terms and what's the difference between, I think disinformation is purposeful, misinformation could be accidental, I don't know. But if you're a professor and you're using, I have a Princeton, I don't know if you guys, and this might be a little, oh, we're recording this. Okay, so maybe I won't go there. But I have a colleague at Portland State who has a doctorate from Princeton and is a full professor, and the kinds of stuff he says on Twitter and he wants to be on Tucker Carlson. He takes every possible opportunity to try to gain fame that way. And the kind of stuff he says, it's shocking, because it feels like lies, like flat out lies in order to create outrage. So how do we hold, it's one thing to say that we were having this whole big debate around Facebook and social media, like to what degree are they responsible for the stuff that appears through their platform? And can they censor people who are spreading misinformation around COVID that could cost lives? All of those kinds of questions, those are all really important questions to ask in the public sphere. But for God's sakes, can't academics and universities hold each other accountable? That should be an easy question. Do we want Facebook to have that much power? That's a complicated thing. I don't want misinformation to be allowed to spread and destroy our democracy, but I also don't necessarily want it to be in Facebook's hands, what information is out there, right? But in universities, faculty have to hold each other accountable. So when we have a John Eastman who's misrepresenting the law in order to try to convince Mike Pence and others to say that the election that Trump has won the election, we need other, because John Eastman is he's not a practicing lawyer, but an academic lawyer. So he's an academic law school guy saying things that 99.9% of the other legal scholars if you've got 70, if you're saying something that 30% of people say, we have a debate. If you're saying something that almost no one else in your field is saying, then we possibly are in the area of disinformation. and cynical opportunism. And John Eastman was that. He was saying things that other academics were like, no, that's not how we read the Constitution or we read. So academics, and because in our culture at large, free speech has been so politicized, and because it gets conflated with academic freedom. So for example, if you start to criticize another faculty, as a faculty, if you criticize another faculty for speech that you feel like is fraudulent in some way, you're anti-free speech and anti-academic freedom, as if that's the same thing, right? So what our book tries to do is distinguish between what this legal scholar, and I'll briefly touch on this, this legal scholar, Robert Post, and actually I'm not sure if I have this will do for that. This legal scholar, Robert Post, he talks about First Amendment jurisprudence for academic freedom. And what he argues in a couple of different books is that First Amendment is very important for democratic legitimation. For us to feel like we don't live in an authoritarian country, then we have to feel like we can. Of course, the ordinary citizen, without Coke money or without celebrity status for followers on Twitter, we really can't make much impact on the public discourse. But we have to be able to say what we think to feel like we're not in a totalitarian state. So there's a way in which the First Amendment is fundamental to democratic legitimation. It legitimates our system in some way, that we can say what we think. I remember I have done a fair amount of work in China. I've done 2 Fulbrights in China. And I remember telling a graduate student remember back when there was that, when Dick Cheney was the vice president, and there was that footage of Dick Cheney went to New Orleans after Katrina, and there was a veterinarian who walked by and said, "Fuck you, Dick Cheney," and just kept moving. And it was like all over the news. I told this graduate student in China about that, and he was like, "I couldn't believe," because Hu Jintao, now we have Xi Jinping, who's much worse than Hu Jintao. But you could never do that in China. You could never walk by a politician and say something disrespectful like that, right? So that's always stuck with me, just like how he almost peed his pants. He was just like running around, like, what? Somebody said that to Cheney? So the democratic legitimation, we have to feel like we can say what we think about our politicians. Democratic competence, this is Post again, Robert Post, the legal scholar. Democratic competence requires that we have some discourses that we believe in, that we can have credibly believe in more than others. I am not an environmental scientist. I can't study air pollution. I need to be able to trust that this academic who's studying environment, who has years of work in this, that what they're saying in peer-reviewed journals that then gets picked up by the mainstream press, that's information. It's not political opinion, right? It's not propaganda. I need to be able to believe that some things are actual information that I can rely upon, that I can then build on to enter into the public discourse. So democratic competence is where universities come in, arguably, or professions, where we're self-regulating, we're policing one another, we're making sure that we're not making things up out of thin air, or that we're not being self-interested, right? Like I want this person to get reelected, or I want this politics, or I don't want reparations, so I'm gonna lie about, I don't want whatever, right? You're not being self-interested or ignorant in some way. So that's where democratic legitimation comes in. So and that's where academic freedom comes in, not free speech, right? So one of the things that's always been said, and I think we're at a moment now where we have to rethink this. We have to use it to open up more because of what's happening in our society around disinformation and misinformation getting so much traction, is that what we've always said in universities is that if you're a historian of Germany and you're an apologist or denier of the Holocaust, you're unfit for your job. See, again, we go back to my example of Anne Frank. We're really comfortable when we're talking about what happened in Europe. We can draw lines. We can say a historian of Germany who's misrepresenting this period in history shouldn't be in front of the class. Students shouldn't be in a classroom. We're not so comfortable when it's our own history. But so we need to say, like, if you're making arguments around racism or you're you're saying certain things about our country. You can't say that we're not exceptional, right? You have to say that America is exceptional. We're based on this and this. The 1619 Project, yeah, there's some historians argue over aspects of it, but you can't say you can't teach it. You can't talk about that, the fact that you can't think about history in terms of slavery as your prism to think about history. You can't do so. The academic unfitness. We have to get back to if you're saying lies or you're ignorant and you're telling your students things that 99.9% of your peers in political science and history or whatever say, no, that's just wrong, then you're unfit to teach. You don't have the protections of academic freedom. You still have the protections of the First Amendment, but you should be strict of your professorial, the imprimatur of your university. Because right now we're in this dangerous moment where this is just the kinds of arguments that we're making. So we made it in this book, It's Not Free Speech. And we have a piece in the April issue of the New Republic about this. This is a dent. This would only make a tiny dent in the destruction that's going on in our society right now, because it's trying to create mechanisms for professors to hold a John Eastman accountable within the academy. So that's just one small fraction. But you can see how we're at this dangerous moment where I think of where academics help create a veneer of legitimacy in discourses that are killing our democracy. So if we can at least we should at least be able to get control of this little sector. I don't know what we can do about Facebook exactly. That's very complicated. So that's where our intervention is, that academic freedom and free speech are not the same things. And we have to rise to the occasion or take on, not abnegate the responsibility of holding academics responsible for what we say. So let me end by talking about the thing that Joyce actually invited me to speak about, which is I've been very involved in the African American Policy Forum because of my academic freedom work, where we created a template. And I have, okay, so people, oh yeah, everybody can see it now. All right, so get your laws off our syllabi. So we have this template for faculty senates to pass resolutions. So faculty at campuses across the country, it says, the resolution is entitled Defending Academic Freedom to Teach Race and Gender Justice and Critical Race Theory. It almost didn't matter what we called it. It was the idea, and then we have different bullet points with it. It was the idea that faculty, state actors trying to get elected should not be determining what faculty can put on their syllabi. What faculty who've been trained as historians or whatever, what they consider important curricula, some politician who's never been studied history, should not be telling faculty what we're teaching. So that's the fundamental idea, which is just simply defending academic freedom. It doesn't matter what the topic, right? So, but it's come to the fore because around racial issues and gender issues. They're trying to tell us what we can do in the classroom around those things. So it's defending academic freedom. And it's having, I'm happy to say, incredible success. So faculty senates first, I'm at Portland State, and Portland State is pretty liberal. So it was super easy. We're caricatured as liberal, but we're very open-minded. So I just told the faculty senate president, I'd like Portland State to pass this resolution. It was done in a month. There's a person at DePaul University in Illinois who's working on this with me. She got it passed at her school. But here's the exciting thing. It's now passed at University of Texas at Austin, University of Mississippi, University of South Carolina, University of Alabama. They've all so we sent the template to them and we said, we're passing it. It's easy to pass it in a blue state. We want people in blue states to pass this resolution that says we will not allow politicians to interfere with our curriculum. Now, whether we really can do that, I mean, it's all going to play out in the courts, right? So, but the fact that the faculty body that has the authority over the curriculum at a university says we're defending this and we're defending our peers who do this, could have some weight in a court. We don't know. We don't know how this is going to play out because the academic freedom jurisprudence is extremely messy and extremely chaotic. So it's who knows how powerful it's going to be, but it could be. It could be powerful. And at the very least, when a faculty on a campus come together and say, oh yeah, this is going on, and this is an attack, not just on this Black Studies faculty's academic freedom, but on all of our academic freedom, because it's the state trying to interfere in what we do. We can say, we can look at new courses. This is what faculty senates do. They look at new courses that are proposed. So if a Black Studies person proposes a new course, we can debate whether we think it should be part of the permanent curriculum. Politician cannot. So it's not that we're saying everybody can do whatever they want. We're just saying we're the ones who need to decide that, because we're the ones who are trained in these areas. So we're saying defend academic. So first of all, it gets faculty, it does a couple of things. Whether it has teeth in courts going forward or not, it gets faculty informed who say, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't teach critical race theory. Why do I care what laws they're passing? I teach engineering, I teach physics. No, you do, because you teach some physics related to the environment in some way. And this is a slippery slope. You start to say what you can say about race, you start to say what you can say about climate change, you start to say what you can say about evolution. This is not going to end here if they win, and if Trump gets reelected, or Santis or somebody. It's not going to end with critical race theory. It's going to be a lot of different things. And so it's not, you do have a dog in this fight. If you don't want politicians to dictate your research or tell you that for the next 4 years you can study the climate, but once this other president from the other party is in power, you can't study the climate. Like, no, that's not how education should work. So faculty across the country are passing this resolution. It is having, so when I started to write people, for example, I wrote, let's see, which slide do I want this one? When I wrote University of Georgia, and I said, hey, I'm work with AUP and AAPF, and we're trying to encourage faculty senates to pass this resolution. They were like, we don't want to poke the bear. And University of Georgia has not passed it, but all the other places most of the other places that were being like, you know what, maybe we should just stay quiet, because what if we don't know if this House bill about divisive concepts is going to pass or not. Maybe we shouldn't provoke any kind of reaction. They've now passed it. South Carolina faculty senate at South Carolina told me that they thought, oh, I don't know if we want to do this. They've done it. Tennessee's done it. Mississippi's done it. Georgia still hasn't, because it's nightmare in Georgia right now for academics. But UT Austin passed it, and it did poke the bear. So when UT Austin passed it in February, Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor, I don't know if you guys saw any of this press, he tweeted these loony Marxist, by the way, the Academic Freedom, I'm going to stop really soon. The Academic Freedom Committee chair who got this passed, she's a neuroscientist. She doesn't do race at all, right? So he's saying these loony Marxist professors at UT, they were get the conflation of communism and race justice stuff again. These people are passing this. It was people in all kinds of disciplines that passed this resolution. But he actually now is saying, he literally held a press conference and said, because these faculty senators, gave me a big FU, I'm gonna now try to get rid of tenure. And I'm gonna try, and then he actually said, I'm gonna revoke, and I'm gonna try to eliminate tenure for faculty going forward, and I'm gonna revoke tenure for anyone teaching critical race theory. So I'm still very glad UT passed it. So we're in this weird moment where I don't know. I mean, I feel like these Senate resolutions that are passing everywhere, they're not getting as much attention. There is an article in The Nation about these resolutions now. I've gotten a few things into the Chronicle of Higher Ed about it. The Washington Post did a story called Faculty Fighting Back that talked about these resolutions. It needs more national attention, because people need to know that faculty are really unprecedentedly a united front, saying that these bills, whether I'm a Republican faculty member or a Democrat, these bills are interference in academic freedom, and it's a version of it's an incipient step of totalitarianism. So we need, the world needs, not the world, but our country needs to know that faculty are united against this, and it's just not getting as much attention as it should. And we don't know how it's going to play out. I don't know if Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott are going to be able to get rid of tenure, or if we're going to be able to hold on to academic freedom and the right to teach what the history as we see fit, regardless of what a particular Trump wants us to do. Right. All right, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jennifer. There is a lot there that we could be discussing for the next day, I think. but we do have a few questions already. There's Al Christians on chat. Al, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Right. You're trying to clarify our thinking about the differences between the world of academia and the world of public policy, and this is good. But I think that maybe the record in academia is not so good in the past. There was a professor Mack at Harvard. You're familiar with him? About 20 years ago, he was some kind of a psychology or psychiatry professor, had tenure, and he wrote a book about how he believed that people were being kidnapped by aliens from UFOs, and there was no attempt to silence him. He had tenure; it was fine. He could promote this thing, which nobody believed except him. Uh, and I don't understand, why there was if if it was so hands off with him now, why not hands off with everything?
Well,
And then so that leads me to think, well, isn't the current situation a crucible that's helping you and all the academic people kind of clarify their thinking about what ought to be protected into, and that you are actually trying to promote some kind of progress, and that society as a whole should have some role in defining what progress is?
so I hear implicitly a sense that I'm now sensitized to this because my politics are not in the fore. And so now I want to be more careful about what we allow ourselves to do as academics. But that's not necessarily true. If you could, not to plug my stuff, but if you could, this New Republic article that we've written, we talk about conspiracy theorists like that guy. And we talk about it's not just the people who are telling lies around our history or around race or gender issues. It's other kinds of fraudulent attempts to. There was a guy, Sandy Hook hoaxer, James Tracy at Florida Atlantic University, and he was doing horrible conspiracy theories over that Sandy Hook was a hoax and just really tormenting the parents of the dead children. And he was finally fired, but not because of being a conspiracy theorist as a mass communication scholar, right? So that's his area. So here we have a historian of Germany denying the Holocaust, essentially, right? Because it's not a physics guy who's just in his own spare time talking about, not in the classroom, not using his university professorship to say, I'm not sure Sandy Hook really happened, right? This is a mass communications scholar saying Sandy Hook didn't happen and providing no evidence for it. So he was finally fired, but on these like very elaborate pretexts, because we don't seem to be capable of talking about academic freedom and unfitness because we've conflated it with free speech. So even though he's a mass communication scholar, so he can claim free speech, but you have a certain kind of platform by virtue of being a professor with a doctorate. Yeah. So we're trying to intervene by reclarifying, like you said, clarifying academic freedom. And it can cut in a number of different ways, right? It doesn't have to cut just in the ways that we're particularly concerned about with these bills.
Thanks, Al. Next, Kathy Boyd has a question, and then we'll go to Joyce and Jules.
Yeah. Okay. Mine is probably a little complicated, but the relationship between freedom of speech and academic freedom. It's my understanding freedom of speech only applies to governmental control of speech, but since Portland State, for example, is a state university, it seems like, is there a difference between private universities and public universities in how this is handled? Is that a good way to phrase the question?
It is different. So for public universities, so when we first were working on this resolution, we wrote to all of the public flagships And there's a reason why we thought public flagships would be the most influential to pass these resolutions and not say Ivy League schools, private schools, right? Because it's the public schools that are going to be most vulnerable to these laws. Private institutions have more latitude in terms of, religious institutions. They have more latitude for doing for speech, but in terms of academic freedom, that there's another angle on that has to do with employee speech. So I'm an employee of the state as a Portland State University. So there's different legal precedents for different things. And so there's the free speech academic freedom kind of juridical stuff, but there's also stuff around employer and employee speech. And if you're a public employee, you have you're subject to different rules and laws than private. So yes, that is a big factor. You almost have to be like, what's the case you're looking at? Is it, well, this particular case has come before the courts and it's a private institution or a public institution. It's about employee speech or it's about academic speech. So you have to look at those things, but those things, yes, those things matter.
But can you also have the reverse and prevent the states from imposing such laws because now they're violating the First Amendment?
Yeah, and I think one of the horrible ironies or hypocrisies of these bills is that some of the same politicians who were capitalizing on the manufactured campus culture war outrage stuff to say that we have to pass laws to protect conservative speech because it's getting drowned out on campuses are now passing these laws that saying we have to censor speech around race history and gender history. So one of the ways that we should be able to say it just isn't getting enough traction is that now you're calling for censorship. So we should be able to fight these bills just on the basis of free speech. It's almost like, actually, I think probably what you're getting at is the fact that I'm working on two fronts and they don't perfectly line up. On the one hand, I'm fighting against these bills and censorship. On the other hand, I'm trying to distinguish academic freedom and freedom of speech to hold professors accountable. And those are kind of two different areas that almost on the face of it seem to conflict in some ways. They don't, but you're getting at the fact that I'm talking about both of those things, but they're separate in some ways.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that the First Amendment only deals with laws and not private or even public. Right. I mean, things like your academic freedom, that you're not really making a law, so
right.
So it's really not clear that you're violating the Constitution. Right.
If you're saying fraudulent things, if you're denying the Holocaust as a German historian, you're not violating the Constitution, but you are violating professional norms. You're undermining democracy. You're doing all these other things. It does have to do with the messiness of courts versus universities, and the university stuff shows up in courts in very uneven ways. There's not good. So that's partly why I'm saying when these Senate resolutions, how much teeth they're going to have, I don't know, because courts want to weigh in, and really what courts should do, for better or worse, because universities make mistakes, right? We've had faculty committees who do try to censor legitimate speech, and a court can come in and hold up the person who's being denied speech. But I would rather that the courts gave deference to what the universities decide, because it's not First Amendment stuff. And the courts tend to conflate it because they're not sensitive to getting a doctorate, what that looks like, peer review. What does peer review mean? For example, in most journals and magazines, we distinguish, when we're promoting professors, we distinguish between articles that have been published in peer-reviewed disciplinary journals. So for example, I can't get promoted because I wrote something in the New Republic. I can get promoted because I wrote something in a disciplinary journal where other experts in my field read it, gave feedback, rejected it, or gave feedback and asked for changes or accepted it. Then I can get, that's legit, that's sort of, we vet each other essentially. And courts don't understand any of it, understandably, right? They're not academics. So I would prefer that they gave more deference to whatever universities decided for good or bad, but it's just really messy and there's no clear path. That's why this guy, Robert Post, that I'm talking about, he has tried to articulate how that it should look. How academic freedom should show up in courts. So he has more and more people have to, he has a certain, he's like Yale, he was a dean, so he has a certain amount of influence, but it's not settled doctrine. It's uneven in the law.
Thank you, Kathy. Let's see if we can squeeze in 2 more questions since we started late. Joyce Lackey, want to ask your question?
Hi, Jennifer. I have 2 questions, but I'm going to, in the interest of just keeping this focused, I'm going to go to just one. And you've already said in a way this is outside your area of expertise, but more college attendance is down and not necessarily rising. So that means a lot more kids are not going to college, and many of the ones who are going and they're looking at the job market and they're not studying liberal arts or ethics or that sort of thing. So what I'm wondering is how then will we ever be able to counter the effect of social media? And if that's where they're getting their information, is the university becoming more, irrelevant's a pretty strong word, but how are we going to fight that?
So you're pointing to 2 things. Enrollment is down partly because of demographics, but also, and then at the same time, because the economy, there's lower and lower mobility. So with each generation, there's less likely that you're going to climb into a higher strata than you were born into. It's more likely you're going to stay in the same economic sphere, regardless of what your education. And there's more, and because of student debt, the state's not subsidizing education. And so it's become an outsourced, it's a privatized thing. And students are told you have to have a degree to make it in this economy, but you have to pay for that degree, whether you can or not. So they're going into debt. So they're becoming more understandably income oriented. They're not taking, like you're saying, they're not going to major in the liberal arts because they need to make sure that they can pay off their student debt and that they can have a child if they want to have a child, etc. So it's true that the liberal arts and the humanities are declining, even as, and then also universities are starting to shrink because of the demographics. The baby boomer kids we're now in a different place demographically. So in terms of like the big picture of how are we going to hold on to a more nuanced, critical public sphere that is sensitized to this history and these issues and isn't just isn't just economically oriented and vulnerable to whatever social media is saying.
Thanks, Joyce. We have one last question from Jules Elias. Jules, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
First of all, I wish I was sitting in your classroom. I love your use of language. It's just beautiful. But I want to share 2 things with you and then bow out. 1950s, I'm on the GI Bill at Brooklyn College in my Italian class. The Brooklyn Dodgers are leaving Brooklyn to go to Los Angeles. There's a petition going around the room to keep the Brooklyn Dodgers in Brooklyn. There's 20 plus students in the classroom. I'm the oldest one, I was a GI, so I'm sitting in the back. By the time the list gets to me, I'm at the end of the line. Out of the 20 plus students, 2 or 3 other signed. And I looked on both sides of the people. I said, what's wrong with signing this? Keeping the Dodgers in Brooklyn. You know what they said? Our parents said, don't sign anything. You never know when it's going to come back and harm you or in some way curtail your existence. That's the degree of fear that McCarthyism spread beyond belief. And I want to end this by saying what Maya Angelou said. I'm going to quote her. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel.
But any last comments, Jennifer?
just that I wish that we'd heard what he said, because he was on a roll and it was really great. He was making us feel something. And so I wish he'd had that last word, but we can kind of intimate what he said, the aura of discrimination. I heard that Trump had created. And the sort of, I was saying earlier, the opening of the floodgates of, remember there was that moment where people said, at least he says what he really thinks.
Yes.
And it's like, but what he thinks is horrible. So, so go back to your basement, go back to your closet, if that's, because it did unleash this ugliness in our society.
This has been a great presentation, and we really appreciate you having come here and presented to us in person. This is